To order the regular council meeting of February 27th to 2023 in the afternoon. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming on the District of Summerland YouTube channel. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Corporate Officer, any late items? No late items. If we get approval of the agenda, please. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Peak, all in favor? That carries. Then we have the consent agenda. Would anybody like to pull any item from the consent agenda? Don't see any, so if I could get a... Do I need a motion to adopt the consent agenda? Yeah, a motion to adopt the consent agenda. Van Elfen and Councillor Betts, all in favor, and that carries. We have two delegations this afternoon, so we'll get right into them. First up, I'll call Naomi Woodland from the United Way. Thank you. Just turn on the, push the button there. Perfect. Thank you.
Thanks. Good afternoon. I nearly said good morning. A few people have said that. Thank you so much for the time to present to this council meeting today. My name is Naomi Woodland. I am the Regional Impact and Investment Coordinator in the South Okanagan Small Commune for United Way. First of all, I'd just like to recognise that United Way British Columbia acknowledges the homelands of the Indigenous peoples of this place we now call British Columbia and honours the many territorial keepers of the land on which we work. I personally live in Kelowna and on the Silk Okanagan territory. For the next couple of minutes, I'm just going to be talking about some of the social issues that we're hearing about in the district of Summerland and across the South Okanagan. In 2021, the local office in Kelowna joined with many others across our province to form United Way BC. Previously, we were Southern Interior, with a goal to being provincial in scope and local in focus. Having our team members embedded in local communities and strengthening connections with community partners helps us to remaining connected to emerging needs whilst utilising the experience and resources of a larger organisation. United Way supports the development of healthy, caring and inclusive communities by strengthening vital connections in the community. We collectively serve over 4 million people across the regions that we serve to support various local needs in community, ranging from emergent response work, support for all ages and stages from children and youth to seniors, and addressing mental health and food security. As United Way BC, we take on an adaptive and iterative approach to addressing local issues, and by listening to our local community partners as well as learning about the needs on the ground, we pivot and support the work of our social service sector in the community. We've heard from many in our communities that these are some of the issues faced by communities in BC currently, and as I'm sure you're all very well aware, as part of our efforts to help address these issues in the Okanagan Small Commune, we've been talking to funded partners and other community partners and taking action on priority areas where we can. In 2021-2022, investments in the region were around $6 million. In the 2022-23 year, United Way BC will be investing over $13 million on a variety of provincially led and locally engaged programming. When the wildfires happened in the region, funding went towards supporting frontline service agencies with their work to support affected members of community, as well as in post-recovery efforts. So that includes in Keremeus, as well as in West Kelowna and West Bank. These investments are possible through the merger with partners across BC and help to increase our impact across rural communities in BC. Community meetings and conversations are centering on the items listed on this slide, with housing and food security being identified as key priorities. Our increased involvement in emergent response is helping to change the way we respond to emergencies, and we are committed to working with government agencies to coordinate social service agencies' responses as emergencies unfold. We have a social service sector activation guide that we're helping to implement in different communities. So a little bit about what kind of work we do in Summerland and have done over the years. sorry. We currently fund multiple social service agencies through the Child Safety Initiative. This is a United Way-led initiative which provides car seats for low-income families. And in total, this initiative delivered over 150 car seats to the South Okanagan and Smilkameen area last year. Other agencies that received car seats and who support Summerland are predominantly based in Penticton, but include the South Okanagan Women in Need Society, South Okanagan Immigrant Community Services, One Sky, and the Brain Injury Society for the South Okanagan. Another key part of our work is the healthy aging team. This service subcontracts local agencies to deliver the therapeutic activation program and better at home programs in the region, with investment for older adults in the region of 1.5 million per year. Through our investments and partnerships in the older adults programs, we are able to continue the work of supporting seniors in our community, reducing social isolation, and showing up in a community care-based manner. There are two other projects you might notice on the slide. 100 More Homes Penticton, which is currently in an agreement with the City of Penticton to address housing and homelessness related issues. And we have a full-time strategy coordinator on that project, with I think around 20 other community agencies to develop a system of housing and supports for vulnerable and marginalised populations in the area. The other one is the Future Leaders Programme, and this was actually something that came out of the Summerland Children and Youth Table. So I heard about a gap where the drop-in youth centre was at risk of closing. And so I contacted the Boys and Girls Club Okanagan, and we had some funding that was going to be earmarked for something else, but this seemed a better fit. So by working with those different community partners, we're able to launch Future Leaders. And this is specifically for 13 to 18-year-olds to build on things like networking skills, financial literacy, volunteering, and just kind of being a bit more engaged in community. So reducing some of those at-risk behaviours that you might notice in that age group. The other photo there, the Mary Gray's photo, that's actually a mural that's in OK Falls that we helped fund through the Youth Initiative grant. The one in Summerland is in the Interior Health Building that the One Sky, One Youth Crew, the One World Youth Crew delivered with some youth. Okay, that's kind of the presentation I have for you today. I just wanted to just reiterate that I really appreciate the opportunity to come and present today, and that United Way is keen to partner with local governments, non-profit organisations and regional districts and learn more about how to better serve rural and remote communities. If there are any key personnel that you'd like me to connect with, please let me know. And if there's any questions, happy to take them now.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. I'll ask Council if they have any questions. Councillor Peake.
Thank you very much. I know that the food bank makes use of some of your programs, in particular the child seat program, and the youth committee has recourse as well. So we certainly appreciate the services that you allow us to make happen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think in terms of the community here, the food bank and resource center is certainly one you want. I guess you already partner with them, but that's the first one that comes to mind. Anyone else? I was just wondering, in terms of your emergency responses, we have a pretty active emergency support services group here, and as do other communities. So I'm just wondering how you work with those ESSs in emergency response.
Great question, thank you. It's essentially as a support to those strong ESS networks. What we've found in some communities such as Princeton and Kelowna was that the vulnerable and marginalised populations weren't always best served by the ESS, or they didn't have the capacity to serve some of those populations. So by working in partnership and pre-identifying what some of those gaps might be, we were able to coordinate our contacts in community and bring those people to the table. So in Kelowna, for example, we had some hotel hampers pre-made by the food bank, activity books pre-prepared by the Boys and Girls Club, stuff like that. And we also were working with some of the First Nation communities to make available wellness checks on some of the elders and families that have been displaced by events.
Okay, thank you. Then thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. I'll now ask Braden Asif to come up, and he's going to talk to us about disc golf.
Great. First off, thank you for your time, giving me the opportunity. And yeah, so I'll be presenting to you today disc golf as a consideration for multi-use with the Summerland Rodeo Grounds upgrade. So a quick introduction to disc golf is that it plays just like golf, where it's stroke play or least amount of strokes, or in this case, throws. Yeah, just to go over it quickly. There's equipment. I'll try and go through this really quickly. I have some other comments at the end here, but given the 5 minutes, I'll try and be as fast as I can with the slides. So the main components are baskets, and the second one is the tee pads. Basically all that you need for a disc golf course minus the personal equipment, and then some other things would be signage, which is quite important for safety reasons, a map outlining the course, and you can get quite creative, as you can see on the slide there on the bottom right. Why are we proposing a course in Summerland? Well, first off, it promotes healthy and well-being. So when the opportunity for multi-use public lands came up with the rodeo grounds, I immediately thought of disc golf. To have an area that serves as a public attraction to promote a healthier lifestyle is and should be a consideration for every community. And disc golf definitely fits into that category. It's affordable and accessible. 91% of all the courses, the disc golf courses, are free to play. And in our case, in Summerland, through donations, it would include the equipment as well. Yeah, so it's really remains resistant to inflation outside of the equipment because it is free to play, and through volunteer and donations, you can get all the equipment for very low cost. It serves more of our community. You can have a lot of players fit onto one 18-hole course and have them move through the course quite quickly. If we want to see more usage of the grounds that promotes free participation in healthy lifestyle, then disc golf fits into that category really nicely. We can repurpose any neglected spaces. I left some examples of other communities that have repurposed their areas that were overrun. And we see that homelessness is increasing today. But I just wanted to say that disc golfers want to protect the area in which they play, and this is why I consider it to be a neighborhood watch program. Basically, by having more players out there, they can protect the lands that they want to keep playing in. Some tournaments can host over 400 people of every age category. So if that means families and friends and officials, volunteers, spectators would all stay in town while the tournament's going on. That's not only tournaments where you can see a boost in the economy, it's through leagues and people just coming up to 4 hours to play the course just to see how nice it is and get outside and play. I've got some more slides here of local courses and the statistics of players over the last few years. I'll just scroll through them quickly. This goes all the way to Calgary, obviously. Raptors Knoll is in Langley. Cranbrook is in Cranbrook. And Rose Hill is in Kamloops. And so is MacArthur Island. Knox is in Kelowna, which has a little bit of a smaller course there. Yeah, so there's UDisc. It's an app and a website where you can see annual disc golf growth reports. So I've added this one for you guys to have a look at as well. Costs and fundraising in our situation, A local enthusiast has come forward with a donation towards baskets for Summerland if we're going to go forward, and it leaves us just shy of all 18 baskets. Another contractor in town, local to Summerland, he also offered another basket and his time and skills as well. So through a little bit more fundraising, we can come up with the entire amount to install the course. Yeah, so the main goal, I was just going to go on with a few more comments. That's basically the end of my slides there. Sharing the landscape is simply done by identifying specific trails of the area of most importance for current and future user groups. So identifying those specific trails when approaching public lands for multi-use, to even be considered, it has to work together, obviously, in many different avenues. That's why we would use very clear signage that sets the rules for disc golfers. Disc golfers are educated and they follow the rules, so the course can remain being used. Multi-use parks have found success with a variety of sports. Some of the most used disc golf courses share space with large public parks. Incidences of disc golf related interference is almost non-existent. Dog and horse friendly parks share space all over North America. And disc golf is a sport. It has rules and boundaries that historically have been followed as the players want to have the space to play. They're very respectful of the various environments. And golf is played with the same code of conduct as ball golf. And no one will be hitting horses or riders or hikers, mountain bikers, or etc. Any other activities. Disc golfers know how fragile our sport is, and we play around various activities and environments. That's that's the end. I do have the map up here. Also wanted to say that this map that I've created is to be taken with a grain of salt, because what we really want to do is put in a pilot or trial period with temporary baskets, temporary tee pads, which can be moved around and away from any sensitive areas or other activities that are using the area as well. So we just want to be mindful of that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go to council with questions. First, Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for your presentation today. My question is, does the golf course, the disc golf course, require maintenance, and who would be responsible for that?
Yeah, it does require very little maintenance, for sure, because we use the natural landscape to play the course in. So the maintenance would be within the equipment. The equipment or baskets made of metal, and who would be responsible for it is the volunteers or the club members of different organizations and leagues.
So there's no, like, you know how with golf courses, they maintain a certain kind of turf, and there's the rough and the fairway, and you don't need to kind of alter or add grass in that way?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I'll go to Councillor Trainer, Councillor Peak, then Councillor Van Elfen.
Thanks for your presentation. It was really interesting. I wanted to know, is there an organization of disc golf players in Summerland?
Not in Summerland, no. There's one in Penticton.
Okay.
And they're at the Three Blind Mice course.
Right. Okay.
There's also different leagues, and like there's the provincial, so it's the BCDS and also the PDGA. That if you're asking about insurances and stuff like that, then those are the clubs that we would be going through.
Okay. And then I was wondering, do you know how many people in Summerland right now are playing this regularly?
I know of 4 regular people that go down for league nights in Penticton at Three Blind Mice. But yeah, we're hoping that'll bring in a lot more, because Kelowna is quite a bit of a smaller course. So we'd like to have the attraction of them as well.
So people kind of play valley-wide, like they go between courses like golfers do?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
They travel quite a ways to play nice courses.
Okay, and one final question. This activity is pretty popular with kids as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of programs within schools as well, where we can take classrooms out and teach them about disc golf, and gets them out and into the forest and hiking around, and yeah, it's.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councillor Peak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm interested in the opportunity of doing this kind of a league thing. I think that tourist-wise, it's great. And now that we're focusing on a plan for the rodeo grounds, I think the opportunity is ripe to put to have an example program and see how it goes. I see the general area that you're outlining, and I'm going to assume you've had some discussion with the recreation department, but I would like to encourage that to go forward and see how that would work for our community. I think it's a great opportunity. And where I came from, they had 9 hole as well as 18, and the 18 is certainly more fun.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Braden, for your presentation. I really enjoyed that. Baffles my mind, never played the game, but looks interesting to say the least. I know my son has up in Salmon Arm. I think he went and played and really enjoyed it, and he's a Summerland resident. But tomorrow night is a Summerland Rodeo Ground Master Plan Open House. Have you touched base with our rec director, Lori Mullen, and could you possibly have this presentation available tomorrow night to show people? Would that be appropriate, Ms. Rec Director?
Absolutely. Yeah, I could definitely bring it with me. I'm pretty excited about meeting with the other groups, actually, just to tell them how we can interact together and be successful together as multi-use. So
Well, yeah.
I'll be there.
That's exactly where I was trying to go with this. I think it's a use that, there's so many different uses that could be combined, and no one's really stepping on anybody else's toes, and it's not an exclusive situation. Other people can enjoy those trails just as much. So I'm excited for you. Thank you.
So Knox Mountain, I've seen that course. The trails and everything they were already there, if I'm not mistaken, correct? And then they put the golf course in with the existing trails. Do you know anything about the background of how that was done?
Not particularly that course. No, I couldn't touch on that.
I'm just wondering, maybe to Lori, if we could find out from the city of Kelowna how they did it, because I think it was an example of an existing. I mean, Knox Mountain's been there forever as a park, right? And then they just put it in, and it seems to work with. People still use it for hiking and everything like that. So that I think that's an important element to this, is that you're not taking away from existing uses or other uses, that it's you kind of play around, unlike a golf course. You're not going to get hit in the head with a ball. Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you were speaking, I was thinking, well, why does this have to be confined to the lot 70 some odd acres, I think it is, that the rodeo grounds master plan is sort of confining their attention to? And then I see you've sketched out something that goes further to the east, and I think that's great. That land is, that lot line is kind of an artificial boundary for the uses up there, and unless somebody in staff tells me why that's a showstopper, I think that's a good idea. I appreciate that your course was a first look kind of thing and could be subject to revisions and stuff, but the bottom line is, let's not confine our thinking to that one lot that's in the master plan for the rodeo grounds. And matter of fact, as you go east, you're taking pressure off that area for the other uses that other people might have in mind. So, yeah, unless there's some reason that I'm not aware of, but seems like a good. Nobody else has a first dibs on that space, so as far as I know. Thanks.
Yeah, I've seen some. Sorry, I've seen some trails that go up there, and there was a couple corral rings, I believe, as well, and I think that a little bit of that land was used. But seeing some of the other plans that were brought forth from like the Rodegrands project, it would be wise for us to move a little bit further east with the course and just completely stay out of their area, for sure.
think, Lori, did you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment on the map and through to Councillor Barkwell. There is a triangle portion of that map just to the east of the rodeo grounds property that is provincial land. So I have been working with Braden. He's had several meetings with me and we've been talking about this, and he has reached out to the province to look for permission to use potentially a portion of the provincial land that's there as well. Thank you.
Are there other places around town that you kind of have had an eye on or see where it might work?
Yeah, it's kind of a problem actually. Anywhere you're driving past a forest, you're like, oh, there's a good spot for a disc golf course. But yeah, me and Lori have talked about probably 4 different potential places for a disc golf course. One possibly on the north side of the future eco village, if so. Or yeah, there's many different areas for sure that a disc golf course can fit in Summerland.
I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much. It's very interesting. Oh, Councillor Barkwell has one quick.
Unless there's some reason why this doesn't work out, I think I'd like to encourage it to be part of this project because there's other facilities there. There'll be washrooms, there'll be parking, you know, so it's a good combination, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, to have the kind of opportunity would be a first of many for a disc golf course. There is sort of an issue with bathrooms, it being out in the forest. There needs to be bathrooms or something like that. And to have a stadium where we can host events would definitely be super attractive as a disc golf community.
Do they have mini disc golf? That'd be my level, I think.
Yeah, they do, and I almost brought a basket with me today just to show you guys, and it's yeah, it's a macro version, but yeah, they do.
Okay, thank you, Braden. Thank you. That's our first public comment opportunity. Do we have anybody registered? No, nobody in the gallery. So we'll move on to our business items. And the first one is the water source assessment, and that I'll go straight to our Director of Utilities.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A little bit. I'll just make a couple opening remarks, and we have a couple presenters today with a slideshow. So we're pleased to present to you today one of Council's strategic priority items, the source water assessment. Pause for cheers. Yeah. Maybe we can get a cheer added to the YouTube there. The source water assessment is part of Council's overall strategic priority for watershed management. This source water assessment is an update to the 2002 source water assessment and is a requirement under our operating permit with Interior Health. The source water assessment goal is to assess our water supply, evaluate the management and operation and maintenance of that, and audit the water quality and identify risks to that watershed. To be clear, this is not a protection plan. This is a source water assessment. The protection plan is coming in 2024, which is when we have it in our 5-year capital plan. And that's a larger and bigger project. So this report is sort of a prerequisite for the protection plan. So this just contains a lot of information about the watershed and our drinking water source that sort of informs the protection plan, which is still coming in 2024. So with that said, I'll just introduce our presenters. I hope they're on the line. Jamie Self, Senior Aquatics Biologist with Lorette, and Rachel Plews, the Aquatic Biologist and GIS Specialist. And Mr. Mayor, do you want questions during the presentation or at the end?
Councillor Van Elfen's whispering at the end, so we'll go with that.
Okay, take it away, you guys.
All right, perfect. As mentioned, my name is Jamie Self. I'm a senior aquatic biologist with Laird Aquatic Consulting out of West Kelowna. I've been doing this for about 12 years now, and I've been involved or lead author on about 25 source assessments throughout the valley now. My associate Rachel is a watershed biologist, a GIS specialist, and we brought her in because of the nature of this project being a watershed as opposed to just a lake intake. We felt that that was an appropriate use of additional expertise. Next slide. So the goal, as mentioned, was to update the 2002 water supply source assessment. A lot has changed in the watershed in the last 20 years, and it was deemed appropriate to reevaluate what's been going on and see where we stand. Kind of the groundwork was to look at both the Trout Creek and Garnet Valley watersheds, but it was decided right from the start that since Garnet Valley has now been moved to a strictly irrigation only system, that we'd touch base on that, but the focus would be on the Trout Creek system, which is where the drinking water supply is currently located. Next slide. So this is kind of the framework for the source assessment, and it is based on the drinking water source to tap guidelines provided by the province and also the new OBWB source protection toolkit. So I will touch base on module 1, then I'll transfer to Rachel for 2 and 7, and I'll come back for module 8. Next slide, we can jump ahead again. So module 1, this is just characterizing the particulars of the source, just the general, what it's like, the current quality, that kind of thing. So the Trout Creek system provides 99% of District of Summerland's potable water demand. The water is stored in a number of reservoirs throughout the watershed and then drawn in through an intake in a concrete flume. Just you can see it in the map there, the little black square, upstream of the rodeo grounds, and then it's diverted into the Summerland Reservoir and then into the water treatment plant. Next slide. So as with just about every watershed in the Okanagan, this is a multi-use watershed, a multi-stakeholder watershed. So we've got lots of different groups and organizations, residents throughout the watershed, all with their own goals. And drinking water is an important use of the watershed, but it is not by any means the only use of the watershed. And just some of the main things, we've got forestry, there's range for cattle, agriculture, recreation, motorized recreation. We've got resource extraction, and of course there is rural residential. Next slide, and I will pass it over to Rachel for a little bit more of a technical dive into some of the things that were discovered during the assessment.
Thanks, Jamie. I'm going to go into module 2, the contaminant inventory. Human activities have the potential to introduce contaminants such as sediments, bacteria, fuels, personal care products into Trout Creek and its surrounding watersheds. Some of these activities include resource extraction, agriculture, recreation, roads, septic tanks, and forest harvesting. Natural factors also have the potential to introduce contaminants into the source water. Some of these natural factors include climate change, wildfires, landslides, flooding, algae blooms, and wildlife. Module 7 is the risk characterization and analysis, where we will go into more the risk of some of those hazards we have just mentioned. But for the sake of time, we are going to focus on the very high and high risks. The risk characterization is a qualitative assessment of risk, and it is the product of likelihood times consequence. Likelihood is the probability that a given event will occur in a 10-year period, while consequence is, if that event occurs, how severe would the impact of the event be? Flooding was considered a very high risk. In this map, there's a purple area that is fairly flat. It is directly upstream of the intake. And when Trout Creek flows get very high, this area could be susceptible to flooding. Flooding could mobilize possible contaminants, including sediment, nutrients, pesticides, bacteria, and pathogens. Landslides were considered a high risk. This map shows the slope stability. The orange is potentially unstable terrain, while the red is unstable terrain. If you kind of look around Trout Creek, we can see the banks of Trout Creek are potentially unstable, and slope failure could cause the release of contaminants such as sediment, debris, nutrients, bacteria, and pathogens. Wildfire was considered a high risk. There have been 2 recent large wildfires in the Inus Creek watershed, as seen in this map here, in 2017 and 2018. Climate change projections predict a warmer, drier, and longer summer, which would increase the risks of fires. And the possible contaminants that a wildfire can release are sediment, nutrients, and fire retardants. Algae blooms were considered a high risk. With warmer temperatures in summer, as I just discussed, that would lead to warmer water temperatures, which would increase the algae growth and increase the risk of algae blooms. There's potential for blooms in Summerland Reservoir, and these blooms, as shown on these filters, they can sometimes clog the filters in the water treatment plants. Bacteria or protozoa introduction was considered a high risk. Bacteria protozoa can be introduced by the fecal matter of grazing animals or wildlife. This figure shows Trout Creek raw, that is before Trout Creek is treated. And we can see a spike in August of 2021. And now I'm going to pass back over to Jamie to go through the recommendations.
Perfect. I just, before we jump forward, I want to kind of bring back to something that Rachel just mentioned, is that this is the source assessment. So this is all looking at the water before it enters your treatment plant, which is an excellent filtration treatment plant. So the bacteria graphs we're seeing are raw water, not treated water. I just want to doubly clarify. So for the recommendations, there is a lengthy table in the report, if you've had to look at that. We're just going to kind of breeze through some of the high priority recommendations here. I've got a list of the top 10 in the slides. You can go to the next slide. So priority number 1 is always to establish a zone around your intake where you have given the intake priority over all other uses. And we call that the intake protection zone. In discussions with district staff, they've confirmed that current protections and zoning around the reservoir and intake are sufficient to qualify. And so we have marked this one complete. So that's always a good sign. Well, we're happy with that. Next, we've got, yes, thank you. This is the area around the intake that we've identified as the intake protection zone. So establish a technical advisory committee, increase watershed monitoring, improve riparian protection, evaluate drainage infrastructure in the watershed, monitor URSISTs, those would be crypto and giardia, provide public education on the effects of motorized recreation in the watershed, work with provincial ministries, because of course the watershed is outside of Summerland's jurisdiction, and develop, maintain a source protection plan. That is something that was discussed just before we started talking, and work with property owners within the watershed. So now we'll dive into a couple of these in more detail. So I did mention the intake protection zone. Next slide. Yes. So the orange area in this map is the intake protection zone identified. And then we've also identified a section of Trout Creek where it's basically 1 hour's travel time. So anything within this green zone can reach the intake within an hour. So that would be, you know, not exactly the intake protection zone, but a very high priority area. But as I mentioned, we marked this as completed. Next slide. So given the multi-stakeholder, multi-use watershed for Trout Creek, it's strongly advised that a technical advisory committee be established. So this would be a group of people representing the different stakeholders in the watershed, you know, ministries, district staff, recreators, users of the watershed, and would periodically come together to discuss the different issues within their areas and try and work together to the common good of improving source water quality. And this is another instance where we would refer back to the excellent OBWB Source Protection Toolkit. It is filled with resources on how to set up a technical advisory committee, who to include. All of that information is there. It is an excellent resource. Next slide. And this was one that we identified going through the data analysis, as there was what we'll call data gaps, areas where additional water sampling and data collection would be useful in identifying and evaluating risks. These include total organic carbon. This is important in the treatment train. It affects the treatment process. As Rachel mentioned, algae blooms are a concern in the watershed, and so we would advise additional algae monitoring. There is algae monitoring ongoing, but we would advise additional algae monitoring. I think that captures the big points. There's the table there, obviously, with a few other parameters. Next slide. And the next steps, as mentioned, this is the source assessment, and this feeds directly into the source protection response plan. Again, this is an area where the OBWB Source Protection Toolkit is hugely valuable. It provides templates and guidance on how to adapt this into that format. The short of it is that you want to take the recommendations from this report and use those as a skeleton framework for developing your source protection response plan, where you'll capture the recommends, capture the action steps, and then you'll track your progress over time as those recommends are acted upon by the district. And that brings us to questions. That was a whirlwind tour through the source assessment.
No, that was great. And we had the report ahead of time. So that's great. Thank you very much. I'll open it to questions. Anyone on council? Councillor Barkwell.
I suppose to speak about solutions is maybe getting a little ahead of ourselves. But I was wondering, giardia has always been an issue, and sometimes it's higher in the source water than others. And how effective is our plan in removing the giardia? Is it 100%? Do we need to worry about sources, or how much do we need to worry about coliform and giardia and such that maybe animals and such are putting into the water because they cows walk into the water to have a drink and horses do and stuff.
Go ahead.
I would defer to your utilities on the particulars of the treatment plan itself. That's not my area of expertise, but in terms, I know the general type of treatment plan it is, and it is designed specifically with this in mind. It has filtration, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it has UV treatment, right? Do I have that right?
Jamie, I think
But
it's
I
only
think
chlorination. It's only chlorination.
chlorination. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it still has filtration though, right?
Filtration.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah.
I would say that that is an excellent solution. The only other thing that is commonly added to address specifically protozoan parasites is UV treatment. But again, I would defer to the utilities on the particulars of the water treatment plant's operation.
Jeremy?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, we do not have UV treatment at the water plant. And it is not currently in any of the 5-year capital program either. Our facilities plan does not identify that as needed at this point. So if it was a brand new plant, it may be included, but for our plant, what we have now seems to be suffice.
Councilor Barkwell, you're good with that? Okay. Councilor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess my question is trying to understand where our assessment leads us in the future. It's my understanding that one of the causes of the severity of the floods and the landslides that happened during the 2021 atmospheric rivers in November, where people lost their lives, was upstream logging roads and industrial development that hadn't really been, counted on in looking at what kind of impacts they had. Is that one of the goals? Would be to look at what kind of industrial development is allowed to happen in our watershed as to help prevent these kinds of, terrible things happening?
That is almost specifically the idea of the technical advisory committee, is that you bring together, the logging industry, the Ministry of Forests, Ministry of, I've changed their name now, Water, Rural Development, I think. And you bring them all together in a room a couple times a year, and you say, from a water perspective, we're seeing this issue, and the forestry will say, we've got this issue, and then together you work to address these issues. The nature of Trout Creek's watershed is such that it is and will continue to be a multi-use watershed. I don't see any likelihood that we're just going to say no more forestry or no more roads in the watershed. I think the focus should be on bringing everyone together and working collaboratively, perhaps identifying certain areas within the watershed that are the highest priority, as Rachel noted there in the slope stability, all those orange zones. Perhaps those are areas where we might want to spend more interest in ensuring that there's no roads in those areas, or roads that are in those areas are monitored for drainage issues, logging be less likely to occur in those areas. But as we noted in the map, it's a relatively small proportion of the watershed. So I think when you say these are the areas that are most important from a drinking water perspective, and you take that to the other stakeholders and say, can we prioritize these areas just for drinking water? But you've got all the rest of the watershed still. That tends to be much more favorably received than just, don't come and use this watershed.
Good. Okay, Councilor Van Elfen.
Thank you. Maybe it's a little early also, but I know with, forestry grazing is a kind of a double-edged sword. I know they've been doing a lot of work with ranchers and what have you to do targeted grazing, and the targeted grazing closer to communities is being used to help mitigate wildfire situations by having the livestock eat the grasses that are closer to the communities and more intensive grazing than in other areas. And I know there's a really good video, and one of our staff members here has it. It's their ranch in their lease up Garnet Valley, where there's been a ton of targeted grazing. They're working closely with forestry, and they have miles upon miles of electric fence that they're able to utilize. And any of the water sources are electric fenced off, and solar pumps put in and water transferred to troughs. So they're doing a lot of work with the environment and targeted grazing that way. So I always hope that there's always room for everyone to work and play in our watershed, but I like the idea of the technical committee to have further conversations. But I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you. Councillor Trainer.
I like the idea of the technical committee as well. It does seem like we should have done this like 20 years ago, because we've been taking water from this area for decades, and there's also been logging for decades. I'm wondering if you know what consideration, like when the province issues forest licenses, do you know at all what kind of consideration they give for the fact that this is a watershed that provides drinking water for Summerland? Like the, areas of protection right now, like, do they look at that before they issue, or do they just blanket issue licenses? That's my first question.
I can't speak to the decision-making process of the ministry.
Okay, I thought that in your work you might have come across that at all, but I guess you don't know that then? That's okay. Okay. I think that's an important thing that we
Rachel, do you want to touch on that?
ask.
Yeah, just because I work some of the analysis I do supports forestry assessments, so I can answer that in like a bigger picture. But sometimes assessments are targeted because it's a community watershed. So there is more, they have to kind of do a risk assessment in some cases, but it isn't all cases.
Okay, so then I guess the onus lies on us as the district to go to the province and raise these concerns and show them specific areas that we'd like logging to not happen. Okay, I think that's really important for us to know. My second question is, under your risks, you list wildfire, algae blooms, all those things I understand. What about the proximity of the Kettle Valley Railway and the landfill? And I realize those might fall out of the bigger source area, but what kind of consideration did you give those?
We did look at those. One thing to consider, and this is kind of fed into our analysis, is that both of those lie downstream of the intake point on Trout Creek in terms of the flow pattern. So that in itself kind of greatly reduces the potential risk presented from them. If they were upstream of the intake point and runoff could run into Trout Creek and then into the intake, that would be a bit of a different story. So that kind of played into our analysis, reducing the risk that we identified from them. And I'm going to call on Rachel here. I think, did you find the landfill study?
I haven't found it yet. I looked for it.
Okay, that's fine.
I remember they monitored the leachate on a fairly regular basis. And so they were quantifying that risk in a separate study.
Okay, so that would be more part of the protection plan then. I understand what you're saying then. That's kind of below, you guys were looking at the intake and above the landfill and KVR risks below that. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you for that.
CO staff.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Holmes, and through to Councillor Trainer. I think that you have a good question there, and what's important is we do have another master plan that we're creating for the landfill, and that will, of course, involve future efforts for any landfill expansion to make sure that we have that leachate management there. What we do have is obviously some historic landfill materials there, and that does have that leachate risk, but that's been designed for in terms of having that positive pressure in our reservoir in order to, as long as we maintain that sort of head pressure in mounding, it reduces any probability of the leachate coming through. But all these things, as we've heard today, are the identification of risks and then the mitigation and applying that prescription to reduce those risks. And so we also have a water utility emergency management plan that contemplates various and sundry scenarios and how we deal with them. But we do look forward to engaging in this protection piece as well, because it'll identify those scenarios to greater effect as well, and how we plan into the future on the broader landscape. So that's how we look at the landfill scenario, which I will say does meet all current provincial regulations, and we do have all necessary authorizations for the landfill at its own location, and it's a known risk that we manage for.
Good. Councillor Peak.
Thank you very kindly. I appreciate the presentation, and I think that the Tech Advisory Group will be most informative for our group, because those combinations of the ministries and the environment and the water and whatever, as you say, they've changed names. I have trouble keeping track of them as well, means that those discussions will actually take place. So when we look at the steep slopes that are involved with the Trout Creek area, and as Rachel identified, the sensitive areas, you look at those solutions. And I know the next part of this plan will look at those solutions. Could be further plantings or whatever, or keeping various uses away from certain areas. I thought that we had, when I was last on council, I attended a couple of meetings in Penticton, and there was a group that had grassland people and ranchers and ministry people. Was that a different kind of group that did discussions? Is this a more specific way of approaching it? I wonder if anybody knows about that group that used to have meetings. Because I attended 2 of them. I see a hand up.
Devin.
Thanks, Mayor Holmes. Yes, that is a rangeland group that meets annually. We are part of it every year, and they come up with ideas of how to improve things and learn from each other through the valley. So it's regular and ongoing. The intent with the Technical Advisory Committee was that we would pull this together next year when we start on the water protection plan. And that then would lead us into future years where we address, on a regular basis, possibly annually, where we are with the action items that we've come up with during this protection plan process.
Yeah, so I think Devin just kind of answered my question, but just in terms of how we pull this technical advisory committee together, do we do that as part of the putting together the protection plan, or is it something you put the plan together and then you try to rein in a technical, or does it matter?
It can be done both ways. You can beforehand kind of establish the framework of your source protection plan and then bring it to the technical advisory committee for their feedback and comment and involvement, or you can bring them in at the start and refine the action steps with them. Either approach would be a viable option.
Did you have anything to add, Devin, or you're good?
Not too much, but the intent, like I mentioned, was that we would pull together that technical advisory committee at the start of the process of the protection plan. But I think, yeah, we'll be discussing that over the next year and deciding how to proceed at the beginning of next year.
Okay, so we're not the only community watershed in the region and in the province. And I know these technical advisory committees are being set up all over the place. And I imagine they're all kind of drawing from the same people, you know, all the government agencies that need to be involved, the First Nations, the industry representatives will all end up being the same person. I mean, that's my, you know, it's putting that out there. And so what is the capacity of all these different groups to serve on all these different technical advisory committees? And is that something we should at all be concerned about?
Thank you for the question. That's something that the ministries themselves have identified numerous times, actually. And there's kind of two things that are playing into it now that is different than it used to be. The first is virtual meetings have become commonplace, which makes it much more easy for different people to get together. You don't have to worry about all of the time spent traveling to and from locations, which I have found has made it a lot easier to get different ministries together in a room. And the second thing is something that we've kind of discussed at these different advisory committees and through these source assessments, is that a lot of these issues are not specific to Trout Creek and Summerland. A lot of these issues are, you know, they occur in Trout Creek, but they also occur in Mission Creek, and they occur in Lambley Creek, and they occur in Powers Creek. And, you know, it's the same issues across all of these watersheds. And so the idea is that we create in conjunction with perhaps something like the OBWB, and I'm not going to put that in their mind. They probably wouldn't want me playing that idea, but just like a greater body having a basin-wide technical advisory committee that addresses these larger kind of broader valley-wide issues, and then Summerland would be a participant in that.
Yeah, thank you. I agree this is the best approach. I know there's, you know, it's all Crown land, and you could say, well, we have no authority over Crown land, and it should all be done by the government, but there's so many different government agencies involved, so many overlapping jurisdictional areas, so many competing interests in our watershed that I think it kind of falls on us as being responsible for providing clean drinking water to our residents to bring all these people together to you know, it's nobody else is going to do it. So it kind of falls on us. Just a question of clarification on the terminology. When we talk about the protection plan, is that the same as the response plan? Protection response plan and protection plan are the same things, or are they two separate things?
The source protection plan is an umbrella term that captures both the source assessment and the response plan. Historically, source protection plan is a term often referred only to the response plan, but it's now kind of an umbrella term that encapsulates both. So this would be part one, and then the response plan would be part two, and then those together are the source protection plan.
Great. Okay, thanks. Councillor Traynor.
Yeah, just to clarify what I asked before, I guess what you just mentioned about us having to take pretty much the lead role on bringing people together to talk about what goes on in our watershed. Since we are not the only watershed where this happens, lots of different people using it for different reasons. That's why I kind of thought the province might have some standards for logging and use. And I'm kind of surprised that they don't have stronger regulations and that the onus is on us to really step up and make sure that everybody's following the rules and that we're bringing people together and making them aware that this is our drinking water and that we need to carefully manage it. So I think that that's something that we really need to get on. And I guess I thought that the province had more of a role in that, but apparently they don't. So.
Well, I think they do. I mean, from the OBWB, I know that there's 23 different pieces of provincial legislation that govern water in the source water, and they don't all necessarily are in sync with each other, and they're different branches of government all regulating different things, and so they don't necessarily all say the same thing. So
yeah, no, that's what I meant though, that it doesn't flow better, I guess, is what I'm saying is.
Councillor Peak, then Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say, Jamie, I'm very glad to hear that you've done as many studies as you've had. I'm pleased that at least we got back to it in 2012, and now we're getting back to it again. The communication piece is a big one, and that's true of all government agencies because they tend to be a little silo-ish. So although there's regulations there, so if somebody comes in for forestry, work in our area or mining, we may receive something here at council, a notification if there's a reason they're asking for us to make comment on it. But if we're having the foresight to move out into the territory to have those discussions first, then it gives the opportunity for us to better understand where we're at with the provincial agencies. So the study's important, the response will be important, and our guidance comes from the combination with an advisory group and our staff to monitor and move it forward. So I really appreciate the work that's been done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, one of my questions would be, how is it that our TAC, our Technical Advisory Committee for the District of Summerland, how do our voices not get ignored? When we're talking about watershed, if every single community and district is looking at their watershed management, and we're trying to get voices to the table to connect with the relevant players and stakeholders in industry and government and our municipality, how do our voices be loud enough to be listened to and to have a say in actually how it's managed?
I'll ask our Director of Utilities to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, that's a great question, and we've been rolling that around internally here since we started working on the source water assessment last year. And the source water protection plan is going to be a pretty heavy lift for Summerland. It's going to be a lot of work, and the TAC is going to be established as part of that process, and we're going to see how it pans out. It'll be probably part of the scope of the consultant that helps us with that plan to help set up that committee. So at this point, we don't know how hard it's going to be, but we're ready for the challenge when it comes time to set it up and knock on the doors and then pound on the doors and try to get the ear of the province and the various groups within the province. So,
CO Stat.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as Jeremy says, we always start on these things and see how they go. What I've seen in my past too, in some of these integrated landscape management sort of planning efforts, is there can actually be a seat at the table for the MLA or groups of MLA, depending on if there's more than one area that's sort of represented. They don't always attend every meeting, but they certainly stay in tune with what's going on, and it's not a voting position, but maybe ex officio to make sure they're at the table with that provincial sort of lens at the landscape level as well.
And I would add maybe the OBWB should be a part of the committee as well. That is kind of one of their major roles, is to provide that voice for all the valley communities. I mean, we all kind of share the same concerns, and it's often, if you're speaking together, it's a louder voice than just us. So we can certainly work with them. Okay. I think we've exhausted this subject. Yeah, thank you very much. Important work. It's really important work we're doing here. We'll move on to 7.2, electrical rates and regulations amendment bylaw, and I'll turn this over to CO Stat.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Corporate Officer just mentioned to me that maybe we needed a resolution to adopt that if we want to stay on that item.
Sure. Sorry about that. So a resolution to adopt the water source assessment update. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Betts, any discussion? All in favor? And that carries. CA stat, item 7.2.
Thank you, Your Worship. Updating this bylaw to clarify our approach to the second electrical meter requirements is a key initiative of Council in your new 2022 to 2026 strategic priorities document. And if the proposed changes are adopted, costs will be reduced for residents who are building secondary suites or carriage houses to help address the housing needs of the community. This initiative builds on other efforts of Council to reduce red tape and to reduce costs for residents, including delegation of minor development variances, which is being discussed at tonight's evening meeting, and also previous efforts such as establishing target timelines for approval of building permits with discounts being provided when we did not hit those targets. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jeremy to talk about this one.
Thank you, CAO Stat. So Council, this request for a decision is for an electric utility bylaw change that would allow for secondary dwellings to be exempted from the requirement of having a separate electric meter. The district is seeing increasing inquiries and building permit applications to construct secondary dwellings, that's carriage homes, secondary suites. Some of this increased demand is a result of recent bylaw changes with respect to short-term rentals and the placement of carriage homes on agricultural lands. And Director Dolovic has expanded on that in past council meetings. The current bylaws state that only basement suites are exempt from having a separate electric meter. Council, often landowners are caught off guard with the requirement for a second electrical meter, and this creates a disincentive to move forward with a carriage home or secondary suite project. Encouraging the construction of a secondary dwelling is one method to allow for gentle infill to address the community's attainable housing needs. The cost of adding a second meter can vary greatly from situation to situation. In addition to the cost that the district has for the customer also has costs in their home and electrician related costs, and that can be things like a new panel, new wiring to the suite, new meter base, underground trenching, etc. We looked at 16-month period to see what we were charging customers for this second meter, and it was anywhere from $744 to $6,800. So it is a significant cost at times. This bylaw change would extend the basement suite exemption to all secondary dwellings. Do you have any questions?
Thank you. I'll open it up to the floor. Councillor Peak.
I think this is an excellent suggestion. My question is, does this reduce our workload in putting this through that a homeowner would be dealing with their own electrician and making a decision privately on what they decided to do? There may be instances that 2 meters are a good thing, but we wouldn't be directing them necessarily to have it.
Yeah. Through the mayor. Thank you, Councillor. So the customer can still choose to have a second meter if they would like to. Some customers want that because it might be a rental suite that they want separately metered and they want to set it up with their tenant in that way. So just to answer your question, they can opt in for that or choose not to. There is an added cost to install that meter, so they are achieving some savings there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's important to have the choice. I mean, often the choice comes down to how much it costs, you know. So, Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you. But further to that is that second meter, the idea of eliminating the second meter is going to be a savings to the district of Summerland also in the future, because those meters do wear out and have to be replaced. So this is a a cost savings to the district also, if I'm not mistaken.
Jeremy?
Thank you, Councillor. Through the mayor, there is a cost savings. We have one less meter to maintain and other infrastructure associated with servicing the meter. Just to be very clear, though, just like at the other two utilities or the water utility, where if we have a couple services, we charge additional basic charges. With the electric utility, it's the exact same thing. So if a person or a property owner was to opt for not having a second meter, we still apply the basic charge to their account for that suite. So we do still have that revenue coming in to support the hard infrastructure for supplying that particular home. That would be the service wire transformer.
Councillor Betts?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note there was just the discussion about the advantages and disadvantages, and one of them being that that renters would not know their specific energy consumption, and how that could cause difficulties for landowners. And I acknowledge that, but I think just to speak to that, we're in that exact situation in our home, as we have a suite that we share with another family, and we've had to decide what is the most equitable division of our utility bills. So it's not an unsurmountable kind of issue. You kind of have to look at how many rooms and how many bathrooms and who is going to use the amount of what. And so I don't think it's an insurmountable issue for landowners when they do have suites in their homes. Just wanted to note that.
Yeah, and if it becomes an issue, they can always put it in a second meter. So, any other questions? I just have one thing I'd like to clarify in the staff report here. It does say that refers to short-term rental regulations, which enables 2 residential units on a property to apply for a short-term rental license. That's not really accurate, though. So just to clarify that, I understand what we're trying to say here, but I just wanted to point that out just in case somebody reads it and they think they can have a carriage house and their own major house and have them both as short-term rentals. No, I think this is a great thing. We want to encourage secondary dwelling, and this is every little bit helps. No further questions. Councillor Peak, bring it forward. Okay. You just that's to
That the electrical rates and regulation amendment bylaw 2023-006 be read a first, second, and third time.
Okay, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Van Elfen. Any further discussion? Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm very grateful to see this come forward. It's, I don't know how many conversations the CAO and I have had over the past couple of years regarding this situation, and I'm grateful that this has come forward. I think this is a real common sense solution. I think it's a win-win for the district and for the applicants, the owners, somebody that wants to put in a secondary suite. This came from me. It came out of lots of calls from ratepayers that were shocked. Like, what do you mean I have to put in a second meter? You know, and it kind of caught them off guard. And some of them were massive costs, like tearing up driveways and, you know, flagstone driveways to get underground infrastructure into a new meter. So like, I'm sure the community is going to be very grateful of this one coming forward. So thank you again, staff.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Peak.
I concur with those remarks from Councillor Van Elfen, but also when we look at where people identify that local governments sometimes have too much red tape, this is just another piece of that story, and it has other repercussions, but it really helps reduce the time for people to get involved in the things that make a difference on their land and to be able to make more affordable decisions in their personal lives. So I'm grateful for that opportunity as well. Thank you.
Thank you. No further comments. I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed, that carries. We'll take a little break now, 2:30. Does that work for everybody? Yeah, okay. Okay, welcome back. We'll move on to item 7.4, the Green and Inclusive Community Buildings Grant application, and I'll ask our CAO to introduce this.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm covering today for the illustrious Fire Chief who's off today, so Green and Inclusive, sorry, I'm not covering off for him on that one yet. Green and Inclusive. No, we wouldn't let Rob go anywhere near green and inclusive buildings. So speaking to item 7.4, we are back again on this priority item, this time with an update on the results of our consultant's analysis on the potential for creating a net zero recreation center should plans for a new one ultimately move forward. And I will let Lori speak to that in just a moment. Tomorrow is our application deadline for the Green and Inclusive Community Building Program. It will take quite a bit of time to hear back on this grant, and so the next time we intend to come back to Council is when the results of the UBCM Strategic Priorities Fund have been made. That's that program we applied to for the $6 million contribution. Timing of the referendum will be explored with Council further once we know the results of that $6 million request from that gas tax program. So with that, I'll turn it over to Lori.
Thank you, CAO Stat. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Further to CAO Stat's opening remarks, the District of Summerland engaged the services of the Sustainable Projects Group to investigate options for the Summerland Recreation Center project to achieve net zero construction and to work with district staff to complete the Green and Inclusive Community Building Grant application requirements. The consultants have confirmed that the Summerland Recreation Center project is able to achieve net zero building construction. They are here today to go through the components and costs with Council. The total costs for these components are just over $8.5 million, which includes design allowances and construction contingency. While there is an initial capital investment for building a net zero carbon facility, these upgrades will result in a reduction in operational expenses through more energy efficient systems. With the current proposed preliminary design, while it is sufficient to achieve net zero carbon on the construction site, any net carbon emissions can be offset via virtual net metering of the district's solar and battery project. Integrating these projects will allow us to capitalize on the existing solar arrays, minimize waste, and promote renewables in the community. The District of Summerland is applying to receive $25 million through the GICB program. If successful, the potential estimated net project cost would be $32.5 million. And this does not include the $6 million UBCM Strategic Priorities Grant, which we are still waiting confirmation on. Council should be aware that the GICB program is highly competitive, with over 1,000 applicants seeking close to $7 billion in the first intake. Many of those applications who were not successful in the first intake will be resubmitting, and it is expected the second intake will also be extremely competitive. We are collecting letters of support from our neighboring communities, user groups, schools, the Chamber, the Penticton Indian Band, MP Dan Ashton, MLA Dan Albus, and the Minister of Municipal Affairs, Ann Kang. And all those letters have been received, and we're putting them together with our package, which is going to be submitted first thing tomorrow morning. It is anticipated that the screening process and announcements will take approximately 6 to 12 months. And at that time, Council can decide on whether to proceed with the construction of a net zero carbon building once the grant announcements are made. So with that, I will call upon Tabor Yastremski to go through the presentation slides and provide an overview of the GIBC grant application, the design components and the costs. And here is Tabor to present the slides.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so obviously the intent of this assessment that we were doing was really to find out how do we make this facility applicable for that GICB funding. Obviously, if we had this conversation about a year ago, a lot more time would go into design. You guys would have full designs available for this. So just remember, all of this design work that was done was very preliminary to meet the minimum requirements and then to help get an application in for GICB. Okay, so I'll give you just a quick rundown on the program itself. We'll take a look at what the requirements are that you guys would need to meet in order to obviously get the funding as well as certification. And then we'll take a look at the budget impacts in a little more detail. Okay, the program itself. So this funding specifically, the maximum amount we can ask for is $25 million under the base program, which is what we are recommending and I believe we'll be moving forward with. You will potentially hear there's opportunities to request more and put in a different conversation with the government. I don't recommend doing that. It does put this particular application under a lot more scrutiny and may, opportunity for a little more, but at the same time, you might end up getting nothing just because it ends up falling outside of what they were looking for with the submission of this program. Okay, so there is definitely additional points. The majority of this application is going to be dollars asked for divided by GHGs reduced, which was a big part of what we were looking for when we put this design together. You'll see the design's actually really simple. We're not really changing much. Well, there's a little bit that's been changed, but we try to keep it as simple as we can, nothing really complicated. And then in addition, there's going to be points. They don't tell you exactly how many go for each of these things, but the points are around it being a smaller community. We've had a lot of success with this particular group, the group that is approving this funding. We've had a lot of success with RDOS and other areas around. We are considered sort of a rural community, which is, bodes well for this particular application. And as well, anything else we can put in there that helps show that this is, we were talking earlier about knowledge dissemination and how else we get this information out and sort of be a flagship building for the rest of the country. Okay, so the main thing they're looking for, the main standard we have to meet is Zero Carbon Design Standard, or ZCB V3. Ultimately, during the construction phase, we just need to make sure, so when this gets built out, the engineers will have to do a lot of assessment, sub-metering to make sure that we're meeting these reductions. There's two components of this program. Two components of this program. One is the actual carbon. You'll hear embodied carbon comes up. Where are we getting our energy from? Where are we getting our concrete from? Where are we getting our steel from? That's going to be a part during the actual design phase if you go through with this. There's extra conversations, there's extra things that need to be happening, but all of it should be fairly standard. Most engineering firms have at least a decent understanding of what this is. Second component is your energy. So that's mostly what we were doing over the last couple of weeks. How do we reduce the energy consumption through sort of energy efficiency, thermal storage, et cetera. So so a couple of the things that we identified with this rec center. Basically 5 simple projects, most of them solar, right? So we put solar PV on the on the new aquatic center, solar PV going on top of the existing arena. There's solar PV carport, which gives you a whole bunch of additional electricity in order to power heat pumps. So then, the electric boilers are then creating heat through electricity. And then the most expensive component is a geo-exchange system. So that's where all the extra heat is pumped underground. We're collecting additional heat as well through finally a solar thermal system, which then sucks as it heats up. If the heating is not used to heat the pool or heat hot water for use within the building, it gets pumped underground and just creates a big heat sink down there. So fairly straightforward. The nice thing about this, the middle school and the secondary school have a geothermal system as well. So that's the most complicated component of this, but it is already being done literally down the road. Okay, so the rooftop solar PV, I'm sure most of you are already quite aware of how these systems work. Fairly straightforward. So this component is approximately $480,000, just over $500,000 with the contingency piece. The arena rooftop, this one we've had to put a little extra. We built in some additional extra contingency in the back end just because this one we weren't able to do a structural assessment of the arena to make sure that it meets all the requirements for it. So that'll be one thing we've built contingency in to watch for, but ultimately it's solar PV, fairly straightforward. The parking lot carport, same thing, a little more expensive per unit of energy you're getting out of it. But again, we had to utilize what space we had to be considered on site within the application submission of this piece. So additional PV there, obviously dual use because then you've got covered parking as well. The nice thing about this one is it looks great when people drive by. There's a lot of marketing and stuff that can be done with the carport solar PV. The rooftop solar thermal, very straightforward. It looks almost identical to the PV, but ultimately all you're doing is there's very thin channels of a fluid that's running through this particular panel. It just heats up water with the sun. Doesn't matter what temperature it is outside, that's all vacuum sealed inside there. Heats up water, which we then pump into your new heating loop. So that's where either electric boilers pumping heat, the solar thermals pumping heat into it, or you're sucking heat out of the ground in order to get whatever the heat demands are for the building. And then the last piece is the geo-exchange. So this is really where you're storing heat. Sometimes this gets mixed up thinking that we're sucking heat out of the ground from going very deep. We're not going that deep. We're talking about 300 feet. This is literally a place where we can store heat that's created from other places. And we will, within this system, we've included pricing to pull excess heat from the ice making in the arena. We took a look and there's about 2/3 of it is going over to the police station right now. That additional third will come over to heat up the arena. And there will be some communication between the two systems. So anytime there is excess, we can now pump it and store it underground if it's being produced. So once that system, the geosystem is in place, we can also suck heat from like any more solar thermal that gets put up in additional buildings in the area, like the RCMP, can then pump and move back over. We haven't scoped any of that out with this particular project, but just know that now that a geothermal system gets put in place, you have access to store heat underground for all of those buildings. The actual cost of this unit itself, so this total project will be about $6 million for this component. A lot of it's groundwork. There are a lot of groups around here that have experience doing the drilling in these types of systems, obviously, because this has been done at the two schools. The contingency for this one was slightly different, just based on the government requirements in the project type. Sorry, I've already covered how the unit works, but ultimately you're storing heat underground. Anytime you got excess heat, we'll pump it, store it, and when you need it, we'll suck it back out. Okay, so the total funds for the addition, as Laurie had mentioned, you're looking at about $8.5 million extra cost. That'll make it, so this is zero carbon emission building, your certification gets in place. Probably more importantly, financially, this brings the cost of the arena down substantially. So we go up 8.5, but then we can drop that down by 25 million. So that brings the net cost to just over $32.5 million. So pretty substantial savings. I know some questions came up earlier about how is it going to impact the total operating cost of the building? We're based on the energy prices you guys are paying right now. It'll be this building should cost you about $140,000 a year in gas if you were not to put this in place. That $140,000 would be removed. And then based on the way the carbon tax is being implemented within BC over the next up until 2030, that'll raise to about $165,000 saved per year. Post 2030, if we use the federal numbers, so we do a lot of federal designs as well, the carbon tax number that we use for them would put your energy bill at approximately $265,000. I'll have to check my notes on it, but it'd be pretty substantial. So that's you're thinking probably 2040 to run that building by that time. So cost of running these things is going up and up and up. This completely removes the need of any gas. So now you're connected to electricity and you're producing all the electricity on site. And that is it.
Okay, very exciting. Thank you. We'll go to questions. Councillor Van Elfen.
First question through to our Director of Recreation, Community Services, and all the other hats you wear. Arena rooftop solar. Is this after we replace the roof of the arena?
Through the mayor to Councillor Van Elfen, it would be after. We would consider, if we're moving forward with this project, we would consider that in our roof replacement. But as council is aware, we do have that in our 5-year capital budget. I think it's coming up for next year. So it would be tied together. Thank you.
Okay, and further, it was in your presentation, which I really appreciated. It was an excellent presentation. By sourcing out raw materials to build this building, such as concrete, knowing that we have 2 concrete firms in our community is exciting because they know they're going to get the business. Am I correct? You know, theoretically, they should get the business. They're local, right? So and it saves carbon from shipping it from other communities to here.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically so there's two parts of that certification. One's energy, the other one is that carbon piece. And that's scope 3 carbon is how far does it come from? So yep, there'll be tons of bonus points associated with bringing that locally.
Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You spoke about the money saved from gas heat. What about from electricity then? If we're, relative, not using, if our purchases are zero and would otherwise be. And did you do a net present value calculation of the savings or anything that kind of helps sell the initial capital cost?
Yeah, so sorry, electricity was considered in it. It's just minor relative to the amount so we built a model based on the amount that would be consumed for the new building if you were to design it as originally designed from, I believe, the previous engineering firm. Just so relative to those two, it was considered, but it's quite minor and there's no major escalation in electricity prices being considered within British Columbia just because so much of it is carbon based. So the gas prices are the one that are sort of estimated to be running away. So as net present value, we could turn that around tonight for you if you'd like. It really depends on what you're using as your internal sort of cost, weighted average cost of capital, things like that. We didn't do that assessment, but I'm assuming you're a financial guy, so happy to track that down for you.
Well, that's a good question there. What your discount rate should be. We've had some discussions about that before.
But yeah, sorry, if we do stay into like those types of assessments are what we do. We just need to make sure we're in line between both parties, what you're in agreement on what the model is going to be and what the savings will be. So yeah, this project alone, honestly, because the costs are so high for the geo exchange system, it's not, if the funding wasn't there, this would be a harder sell. And we obviously would have done a lot deeper digging and trying to identify a better way to approach it. But I mean, at this point, we're making the building better. All these things are in place and we're going to shave off $17 million on the project. So yeah, so apologize we don't have that number for you, but we can get her.
Councillor Traynor.
Hi, Tabor. Thanks for your presentation. That was really good. Just wondering about the maintenance for this type of building, like yearly maintenance. Does it take specialized training in order to maintain these new, as opposed to a conventional pool?
Yeah, so because we're completely removing the gas system, there's one less trade that's needed to maintain that particular building. So the electrical systems themselves, technically now that we do have a heating loop that's moving around the building, the existing building and the future building will have a heating loop. It's just slight different specialization. So the same people will be maintaining those systems. But again, the reality is those systems are already in place in the middle school and the high school. So there's nothing here that the city can't currently get their hands on for labor.
Okay, and just, can I follow up with one more? In the grant, then, are you going to mention that we do have geothermal very close by and that it's been successful? Do you think that will help strengthen our application at all?
Yeah, so we will mention it in the sense that there's potential risk. And part of what they're doing when they're trying to put points towards these systems is trying to minimize the risk for the money they give out. Is it going to be a successful project? Is it going to hit the things they're looking for? There is risk with the geothermal project because things look good. I mean, already drilling's been done for the structural component of it, but we haven't done a 300-foot borehole to make sure that there's space. The nice thing is because the other schools are there, we're saying that this is a low risk. Out of any other geo project you're going to find, this is incredibly low risk. So yes, it's being brought up. Yeah, but we'll take it from that component and then we'll try to, obviously, we keep going back and forth and just trying to make sure we're minimizing any risk as much as possible within the application. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Councillor Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I found your presentation really exciting. I really hope that we're able to get the grant and go all the way and have a building that can really, make a statement about our commitment towards, mitigating climate change and stuff. That's really important to me. But as is bringing down the cost. So, but actually, I was just hoping, could you please review between the two of you? So I know with our gas, the annual gas and the annual electric costs, just so that we have these talking points in talking with citizens of Summerland. So the gas annually, what are we looking at? And then same with the electric, what we are paying now annually, and then what it would be with the net zero. I was writing numbers down before, I just didn't get them all in.
Yeah, happy to. So basically, we'll try to get the application sorted out. We have until noon tomorrow to get all this in. Once we get that locked down, yeah, we're happy to provide. We'll just give you our basic models for what we would expect that to be from with or without carbon tax, with or without price escalation, et cetera. So, Councillor Barkwell.
Yeah, I still refer to the pool as the new pool. And so I was wondering how long this pool will last. You know, is there anything, and should we make a special emphasis in the future once we get that grant and build this pool and celebrate it on our Earth Day videos that it lasts longer than the old pool did?
Yeah, I mean, most of the new design standards compared to, when did the first pool go in? Going to date somebody? 50 years, okay. Yeah, so the design standards over the last 50 years have changed. So the way that this will be built, I'm assuming is different. I haven't looked obviously at the structural drawings and everything of the original pool, but yeah, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly what the expected life is of the new building, but we do building condition assessments, and that could be part of the design, is give you a good sense of when each of the components would start to fail and could be replaced. The nice thing is, again, there's literally less moving parts. That's part of the challenge with some of the older buildings is you've got boilers, there's a lot more pumps, there's a lot more things moving around. Even though this has a geothermal system and there is sort of a circulation loop going underground, overall, there is less moving things and less things to break. So typically means it's going to last longer. Councillor Van Elfen.
Sorry, I think Councillor Peak had her hand up before me, sorry.
Councillor Peak.
Thank you, Councillor Van Elfen and Mayor. My question, I too agree with Councillor Betts that I want some points made, so after the fact that would help me. I didn't read this application, so the fact that we're working so diligently on carbon and energy reduction, does that in itself give us points without going to the weight of the geothermal or whatever? So that's my question.
Sorry, are you asking if just because we're putting in so much effort on the other components?
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, the initial way, so they don't announce this, but the way this group is going to take and process all these applications is probably going to be about 1,500 applications are going to go in. First thing they're going to do is they're going to hire multiple short-term contractors to review, and they're just going to rate them dollars asked for divided by GHGs. Everybody will be ranked from 1 to 1,500. Then from there, they'll start to go through each of the individual components of the application and rate how you compare to other groups. Part of it's going to be, yeah, those types of extra bonus things will start to be considered. So yeah, long story short, these things do definitely help the point system. So yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in the funding potential, estimated cost ballpark 57 million, request for 25 million, estimated net project cost at 32 million, but through to our rec director, that's not counting the possible 6 million? Okay, so I just wanted to know. Thank you.
There was some talk about the solar facility that we're building can be used as part of this application. How does that work?
So there's two different things we can do to achieve, because ultimately the federal government just cares about that ZCB piece to meet the minimum requirement. So technically using the existing solar group, the existing solar system that's going to be set up, putting in virtual metering, there's certain things that we'd have to put in place, but that does count if we don't want to put the solar PV on the roof. The challenge with that is it will weaken our application, because then we're using would be considered offsets, right? They're great offsets, they're down the road, it helps, but at this point, knowing at how many applications are going in and looking at the success rate of last year, we're basically shooting for the maximum amount of points possible. So it is obviously an additional cost, but it might mean the additional $25 million funding.
So we can't use it as well and not just be net zero, but be net positive or whatever it's called.
Well, you will actually be, so as the community as a whole, you will be, right? I mean, that electricity is going to be sold. We'll have a separate conversation once that gets put up about actually selling those carbon offsets elsewhere, claiming them differently. There's lots of opportunity there. But the nice thing is that is also, we have mentioned that because it is in our back pocket, right? So again, trying to reduce the risk. So say the designs were off or the arena can't hold the structural part of the arena can't actually hold the solar PV. We've mentioned we just fall back on taking power from down the road. So yeah, we definitely covered that off.
CO stat?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think it helps us in a few ways. I like the way the application's being structured to give us the strongest possible play here. The way the solar helps us too, as mentioned, as sort of an icing on the cake and contingency. That's one big thing. The other thing is because it's so competitive, obviously all the people that went for the first round are going to try it, that weren't successful, will try and apply on the second round. How do we differentiate ourselves? How do we differentiate ourselves? And the solar project is being highlighted in the application to speak to our broader sort of environmental ethic as a community and other ways we're leading to create a broader picture of what Summerland is doing from a flagship perspective, in the hopes that this will be not just a one-off project, but something that aligns well with that. And I think those things sort of work together to help also sell our project. The third thing is that in the application, it asks for recent examples where grant money has been utilized to create a complex facility, federal grant money in particular, I'm sure is what they're interested in, from sort of a track record perspective. And so we're highlighting that solar project as one recent example where we received federal money. And we've pushed forward on that to see success despite the market variability, despite the risk, despite all these things. That's the worst thing that can happen for a senior government is when people give grant money back. They really don't like that. We persevered through that despite all the inflation, all the other things, and it's moving forward and on time and on budget. And so that's another way it'll help our grant application as well in terms of strengthening it.
Thank you. Councillor Van Elfen, then Markwell.
So just going off of what our CEO said, so then other projects in the community such as solar on this building and solar on our George Riga Center and things like that, will that help? Is that possible to help with? And then our partners, the school district 67 with their geothermal projects and 2 schools, like these are all real positive stories in the community. And I just wondered if that could be utilized in the application.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are components that are being put in. I think everybody's on the same page here, right? Anything we can do to show that Summerland does care, is committed to doing this, absolutely helps and gives us bonus points. So,
Councillor Barkle.
So along those lines, that excellent video that Mayor Holmes is in about Summerland's Earth Day activities and how we're so in tune with Earth Day that we're a national representative. That little link to that would be great. Yeah. Just
yeah, we can take a look. I know it'll be tricky to put a link in the PDF, but we'll bring it up, right? I mean, honestly, anything we can do to help bolster that. So that's a good point. And I don't believe we've referred back to that particular event, but we can.
I'm really stoked about that video. That's great. Yeah.
Councillor Van Elfen.
Just through to our CAO, just further the conversation about municipality with solar and this and that, but we also have agreements and contracts with private solar people, homeowners, that we're buying their excess, right? So that's another positive story in the community of Summerland, that we're pretty proactive thinkers here, and we're encouraging homeowners to electrify, go with solar and what have you. And yeah, we welcome to buy the excess from them. So it's just another positive part of the story.
Councillor Traynor.
Tabor, do you know, are there any other net zero pools in BC, or like how many there are in Canada? I mean, I don't know if you know an approximate, or is this just like totally new to do this kind of project?
So there's lots of design in place to basically put a lot of buildings in, and I don't have the stats in front of me of what's there. I don't know, Lori, did you? I know we were talking about that earlier.
Through the mayor, we did find a good example that's being built in Ontario, and I can't recall if they were successful in receiving funding. I think they might have received funding through this, and it is a net zero aquatic facility, very similar to ours, but quite a bit larger. But I am not aware of anything in BC, but CAO stat looks like he has some information.
Yeah, if I may jump in there, it was Loyalty Ontario, and they were successful in receiving money. It's a retrofit, but it seems like a really substantial retrofit. And if I recall correctly, I think they received something to the tune of $12 to $15 million. So a pretty good chunk of change as well. And I do think this, so, being the first, there's always that risk of, oh, are we going to be way out? The other side is, I think that they might be looking for those big projects that to show from a showcase perspective, it can be done. And so I think in our unique context of being maybe the first on this, showing that it can be done from the science and from the analysis, and fitting into that broader narrative that we want to put forward about our community sort of environmental ethic. I think there'll be a lot of applicants that'll quickly be, disregarded because it's, unless they write their application really well, it'll just look like, well, they were trying to do this thing and they saw this grant program and they thought, sure, we'll make it net zero. What we're trying to put forward is that this aligns with the other actions and intents and values that we have as a community. And we don't mind being first because we've pushed the envelope on other things and have seen success.
Yeah, that was my point, is that I think we have an opportunity to really say that we want to be leaders, and we're already leaders in other ways. And this fits in with our vision. And so that's kind of neat to hear that there isn't anybody else doing this exact thing. So.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. It would be an amazing showcase. I hope we get it. Any further questions, comments? If somebody wants to bring a motion to receive for information. Oh, go ahead, sir. Yeah, wrap up.
Respond to that too with the applications that we have put in. Calgary, what is it, COP? There's a couple applications that went in last year that were approved as well. So, and COP was another one where I think we got them $25 million for the full application for a build out on some zero emission stuff that they're doing. So they are approved. This is new, cutting edge, which is good once the building's in place, but at the same time, we know the government is approving, and with the way these applications have been written in the previous intake, we think there should be success there too, so.
Yeah. Awesome, thank you. Somebody want to bring forward to receive? Thank you, Councillor Betts, Councillor Van Elfen. Any further discussion? I'll call the question, all in favor? And that carries, yeah, thank you very much. Item 7.5, mutual aid agreement, CAO stat.
Thank you, Your Worship. So now I will channel our fire chief now that I'm on the correct agenda item. Okay, so what we have before us here as the fire chief's away, I'm speaking to it, the mutual aid agreement for additional emergency resources. And this is a routine operational agreement that expired in late 2021, I believe. It reflects our ongoing approach of good collaboration amongst the partners. And if it moves ahead with council support, and of course the support of other councils and regional districts in the future, it will go for another 10 years. One thing that's built into the agreement is the ability for any party to give 90 days notice if they want to be released from the agreement without any requirements or conditions upon that, so lots of flexibility there. And frankly, we're really glad to see this come into play again, particularly as we enter emergency management season. So all the various partners are now moving through the approval processes. The fire chief and I have both reviewed the agreement, and we certainly are putting it forward for hopefully for support, as we do believe this is important.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Peak?
Could I bring it forward? Because I think it's a bread and butter thing, and I think it makes really good sense.
Sure, I just have a question, if I may. So would we still have a separate agreement with Penticton, or would this supersede that? And I guess why would we, does that mean we have two agreements with Penticton, or how does that work?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I did talk to Rob about that. And at this point, we would just continue to maintain our existing other two standing agreements as well as supplementary. They speak to a few more details as they're our closest partners in Peachland and Penticton that goes beyond this, and long-standing instruments, I think, that go all the way back to the 80s. So working well, probably keep them in play and use this as the overarching strategic piece that knits all the other pieces together. So,
thank you. Councillor Peak, go ahead. Don't think you have to read it. if you don't
No,
want.
as it shows on the agenda item 7.5.
Okay, thank you. Second, Councillor Van Elfen. Any discussion? Councillor Barkwell? Oh, okay. I'll call the question then. All in favor? None opposed. That carries. 7.6, 2023 FCM. Corporate officer, please.
Thank you, Mayor Holmes. So the 2023 FCM, or Federation of Canadian Municipalities, annual conference and trade show will be held May 25th to 28th, 2023 in Toronto. So Council Policy 100.6 states that members of council that wish to attend the FCM conference require prior approval of council. So registration fees for the conference are $985 until April 21st. And this does not include the cost for accommodation. It is expected that the cost will be approximately $270 a night, and flights from Kelowna are approximately $700 to $800 round trip. So we're just seeking a council resolution for those that are interested in attending.
Okay, I know Councillor Peak and Councillor Barkwell have expressed an interest, as have myself. I guess the way to approach this is anybody who's interested, just let's tell us now. And, knowing also we have 3 more years ahead of us, and we might not always want to go, all of us, on the same year. So, Councillor Van Elfen?
I don't have an interest this year, but just a question, can I fly one way and then continue on to somewhere warm? Just kidding.
I'll buy you a one-way ticket. Councillor Peak?
Yeah, I did express interest, but it is not necessary that I go this particular year. And if Councillor Barkwell would like to go this year, I'd be certainly willing to wait till another time.
Councillor Barkwell?
Yeah, I was all keen to go several years ago, and then I'd been thinking about it for a long time, and then you'd been to one and had said how great it was, so that kind of tipped the balance, and then COVID hit. So 3 years later, I'm expressing my interest in going again, and I don't expect I want to go every year or anything like that, but after 8 years, I'm still have that interest.
I'd certainly encourage everybody to try and go at least once during the term. And again, I don't know, if we think, I know we budget year by year, but if you think in terms of the term, I don't know if it really matters whether the money comes out this year or next year or 2 years from now, but maybe our finance director might think differently. So it's really, somebody put a motion on the table, I guess. Councillor Betts.
That Mayor and Councillor Peak, Mayor Holmes and Councillor Peak be approved to attend? No. Agenda item 7.6. Oh, pardon me, Barkwell. Well, yeah. This is terrible. Pardon me.
Oh, right here.
I was looking at Councillor Peak, okay? So Mayor Holmes, Councillor Barkwell, attend FCM, agenda item 7.6 as read up on, there we go.
Yeah. And a seconder for that motion? Councillor Van Elfen, any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? And that carries.
I'm hoping I can show your video over there.
Okay, so moving on to 8.1, bylaws for adoption. This is first three readings. First three readings should be adoption, shouldn't it? Yeah, yeah, adoption of the budget. So Councillor Trainer brings that forward. Seconder, Councillor Van Elfen. Any discussions for adoption of a budget? Okay, all in favor, and that carries. No items removed from the consent agenda. Public comment. Is there anybody online, corporate officer? No, nobody online. So if I could have a resolution to close the meeting. Councillor Van Elfen, Councillor Peak, all in favor. And that carries. And we'll just go